My ex shouted, "You'll regret this." When I served him with divorce papers, but the next morning he found his bank account emptied. Then my lawyer called. I was sitting at the kitchen table, swirling the last bit of coffee in my chipped blue mug. Cold, stale, and bitter, just like everything else in my life these days. My best friend Jenny had been telling me for months that I needed to leave him, to cut my losses and start fresh. And I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But there were days when I couldn't even recognize myself in the mirror, let alone make life-altering decisions. The morning light streamed through the blinds, casting thin, jagged stripes across the kitchen floor. I grew up in this house on Grant Street, smack in the heart of Ann Arbor. My parents had left it to me when they passed, thinking it would be the foundation of a new family I'd build here. Every scratch on the wall, every creak in the hardwood floors, reminded me of who I was, who I used to be. But now, my life was anything but familiar. The back door creaked open, and I didn't have to look up to know it was Jake. His heavy footsteps, the smell of that cologne he wore, too strong, too aggressive, filled the room. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Today was going to be the day. "Morning, gorgeous," he said, sliding into the kitchen with that same smug grin he always wore. He was trying to charm me, like last night's argument hadn't even happened. Like we weren't on the brink of signing divorce papers. "Morning," I mumbled, keeping my eyes on my mug. The coffee was almost gone, just a few sad drops clinging to the bottom. Fitting, I thought. Jake pulled out a chair across from me and flopped into it. "You make coffee?" I did. I didn't bother to offer him any, though he'd probably make himself a cup anyway. I forced myself to look up at him, to meet his gaze without flinching. "Jake, I need you to look over these," I said, reaching for the envelope on the table between us. It was thick, with every piece of our broken life shoved into black and white legal jargon. Just looking at it made my stomach twist. He raised an eyebrow, looking more annoyed than surprised. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" I took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. "Yeah, Jake. We are. We've been at each other's throats for 2 years. I can't keep doing this." Jake laughed bitterly, leaning back in his chair. "You can't keep doing this? What about me? You think I'm just having the time of my life here? This isn't working for either of us, Jake," I said quietly. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking under the table. "We're both miserable." "Maybe you're miserable," he shot back. "But I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for you to turn into this." He paused, his face twisting into something between anger and contempt. "This bitter, nagging wife. Don't you dare." I felt the words catch in my throat, but I forced them out. "I was fine, Jake. I was happy before you started coming home at 2 a.m. reeking of whiskey and God knows what else." "Oh, here we go again," he said, rolling his eyes. "Do you have any idea how hard I work? How much pressure I'm under every day? A couple of drinks with clients isn't a crime, Mia. It's not a couple of drinks, Jake. It's every night, and it's more than just drinking. You come home angry, you break things." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "I've never hurt you. I'm not that guy." "No, you're not," I said, my voice shaking. "You're the guy who keeps saying he's going to change, but never does. You're the guy who thinks he can just smooth everything over with a smile and an apology." I pushed the envelope closer to him. "Please, just sign these. We'll both be better off." Jake's face twisted into a sneer, and he leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "Better off? You think you're going to be better off without me?" He laughed, low and bitter. "You think some judge is going to side with you, after everything you've done?" I felt a surge of anger, hot and raw, bubbling up inside me. "What I've done? Jake, are you kidding me? I've held this marriage together while you held it together? That's funny, Mia," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because from where I'm sitting, all you've done is complain. You think you're some kind of martyr, don't you? Poor Mia, trapped in a marriage she never wanted." "Enough," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't want to do this anymore. Just sign the papers, Jake." He looked down at the envelope, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might snap. For a moment, he was silent, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd understand. But then he looked up at me, his eyes dark and cold. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You think it's going to be easy, just walking away from me? You think I'm just going to let you take half of everything I worked for?" I swallowed, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "Half of everything we worked for, Jake. This isn't just yours." He laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that echoed through the kitchen. "You think a judge is going to see it that way? After all the crap you pulled?" "Crap I pulled?" I felt my hands clench into fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Jake, I don't know what lies you're telling yourself, but I've been nothing but patient with you. I'm the one who tried to save this marriage, while you were out doing God knows what with God knows who." He shoved the envelope back at me, nearly knocking over my mug. "Go ahead, Mia. Take your stupid papers. But don't think for a second I'm going to make this easy for you. He stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. The silence that followed was deafening, and I sat there, staring at the envelope on the table. The divorce papers that had taken me months to prepare, to work up the courage to even consider. This was supposed to be the start of a new life. A life without him, without the constant yelling and accusations. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done with me. That this wasn't over. The next morning, I was still on edge. I barely slept, my mind racing with everything Jake had said, every look he'd given me. But I knew I had to keep moving forward. I was determined to end this, to finally get out. I was pouring myself another cup of coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was my lawyer, Michael Grayson. Ms. Briggs? The phone buzzing broke the stillness of the morning, making my heart skip. I'd been holding my breath since Jake walked out last night, half expecting him to come back, fists pounding on the door. I took a deep breath and answered, forcing my voice to sound calm. Hello? Mia, it's Michael Grayson. I have some updates on the papers. I exhaled slowly, relieved to hear my lawyer's steady voice. Good morning, Michael. I'm ready. Lay it on me. Well, he started, his voice calm but with a hint of satisfaction. I filed the papers as planned, and Jake's lawyer confirmed receipt. But there's something else. Something else? I know this process has been tough, and I want to say, you're handling it well. But I have news that might make your day a little brighter. Bright is something I could use, I muttered, gripping my coffee cup. You'll be pleased to know that Jake's recent spending habits might actually work in your favor. Spending habits? My heart raced. For the past 2 years, Jake's late nights and mystery withdrawals had been a source of tension between us, but I'd never been able to pinpoint exactly what he was doing with all that money. Yes, let's just say he's been putting funds toward personal interests. And some not-so-legal expenses, too. His bank records show he's been draining your joint accounts without any authorization. My heart thumped in my chest. So, wait. Are you saying I can use this? Michael chuckled, a dry sound that held just a hint of triumph. Mia, we can do more than that. Jake's misuse of funds gives us leverage, significant leverage, in the divorce settlement. He's been trying to hide assets, siphoning money away under your nose, and we have the paper trail to prove it. A grin spread across my face as I realized what he was saying. So, we're talking about, I don't know, a fair settlement? Michael's voice grew more confident. More than fair. Jake's in serious trouble. When I lay this all out, his lawyer will have no choice but to advise him to settle and settle big. Otherwise, it's all going public, financial ruin, possible criminal charges. It's not looking good for him. A wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. Michael. Thank you. I honestly didn't think I'd get anything out of this but a headache. He chuckled again. Oh, trust me, you're getting more than that. This isn't just about the money, Mia. It's about holding him accountable. I know it's been a long road, but the end is in sight. I hung up the phone and felt the tension in my shoulders finally start to ease. Jake thought he'd had the upper hand all this time, that I'd crumble under his threats and manipulation. But now, the tables were turning. The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxious energy. I couldn't stop thinking about the papers, the hidden accounts, the reality that Jake's empire was starting to crumble, and he didn't even know it yet. I spent the afternoon cleaning out my things, boxing up memories that I'd long since buried, our wedding album, a dusty, half-forgotten collection of anniversary cards we'd once exchanged. It was like a slow, quiet exorcism, packing away the pieces of a life I was finally ready to leave behind. Later that evening, as I was taking out the trash, I heard footsteps approaching. I turned around, heart racing, and there was Jake, standing in the driveway with a smug grin. He must have thought he'd come to gloat. So, he sneered, crossing his arms. You really thought you could walk away from me, huh? You think you're going to waltz out of this with half of everything I built? I raised an eyebrow, fighting the urge to laugh. He had no idea what was coming. Jake, this isn't about you or what you think you built. This is about what's fair. Fair? He took a step toward me, his face twisted with rage. You're going to regret this, Mia. You think any judge in his right mind is going to side with you? Actually, Jake, I said, keeping my voice steady, I don't need to worry about that. See, I don't think a judge would look too kindly on your other investments. I let the words sink in, watching his expression shift from anger to confusion. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice tinged with panic. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the screenshots my lawyer had sent me earlier, pages of bank statements, transactions he couldn't explain away. Do these look familiar? I asked, holding up the phone. Because they show thousands of dollars you withdrew over the past 2 years without my knowledge. Thousands, Jake. Care to explain? He stumbled back, eyes widening. You went through my accounts? I shrugged. I didn't have to. My lawyer found everything we needed, and it's all legal. You really thought you could keep stealing from me, and I wouldn't notice? His face turned an ugly shade of red. Mia, don't be ridiculous. I was just. Look, I was covering expenses for us. Us. I shot back, my voice rising. Are you kidding me? You spent it on yourself, Jake. On your personal little projects, those weekends you said were business trips. You drained our accounts without even a second thought. But now, that's going to cost you. He stammered, unable to come up with a response. The man who had always been so quick to belittle me, to make me feel small, was finally speechless. Here's the deal, Jake, I said, my voice cold and steady. You're going to sign the papers. You're going to agree to the terms my lawyer has laid out. And if you don't, every single one of these transactions becomes public. Imagine what that will do to your reputation. To your job. You think anyone will trust you after this? For a moment, he just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He'd always been so good at intimidating me, making me feel like I was nothing without him. But now, he was the one floundering. You can't do this, he finally said, his voice barely more than a whisper. You can't just take everything from me. I gave him a sad smile. Actually, I can. And I will. You should have thought about that before you decided to treat me like something you could throw away. He stared at me, a mix of anger and helplessness in his eyes. For the first time, I saw him for what he really was, a scared, selfish man who thought he was untouchable. But now, he was standing on the edge, teetering on the brink of losing everything. Goodbye, Jake, I said softly, turning my back on him. It's over. As I walked back inside, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was free, finally free, from his lies, his manipulation, his hold over me. I didn't need his approval, his validation, or his money. I'd built a life before him, and now, I was ready to build one after him. The divorce was finalized 3 months later, and I walked away with more than I'd expected. Jake's financial indiscretions had given me the leverage I needed to secure a fair settlement, and then some. He'd tried to fight it, of course, but in the end, he'd had no choice but to accept the terms. His reputation took a hit, his friends distanced themselves, and he lost the very job he'd clung to as proof of his worth. And me? I moved out of that old house on Grant Street, leaving behind the ghosts of a life I was done with. I found a small, cozy apartment downtown, close to the lake where I'd spent so many childhood summers. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. One evening, as I sat by the water, watching the sun set over the city, I thought back to Jake's final words, "You'll regret this." But as I watched the colors fade into the horizon, a peaceful smile spread across my face. Regret? Not a chance.